Welcome to the Omnibus Show, a program for people who are interested in everything, with deep conversations on a wide variety of subjects. And now your host, Dave Gibbs.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Omnibus Show, the program for people who are interested in everything, with deep conversations on a wide variety of subjects. This week's guest is Marria Peduto. She was, I would say, an international student of life. She's on her way, but she is heading out to Washington State, the University of Washington, this year to enter the program, the Masters of Marine Affairs. But what's very interesting about Marria is that she has gone on a total international program. She's gone to all these programs around the world. And we're going to talk today learning about the world from Marria's perspective.
Yes.
So welcome, Marria. It's great to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
And now you're from Indianapolis.
Born and raised.
Born and raised. And to go right into it with all the studies and all of the programs, first question is, what was the start? What got you interested in all of these travels you've made throughout the world?
Mm-hmm. So I think for me, my lens and approach to the world, and specifically the international side of things, is through food. And so when I was little, I loved to... That's a very
good one.
I think it's the best angle to come about it, because you can really, really experience the world through food, and it's one of the ways that you can experience it when you don't have the access or ability to travel. And so even when I was like 8 years old, my dad says he remembers walking downstairs, and I was sitting in front of the TV, and I was writing down furiously, like scribbling on a piece of paper. And he's like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "Oh, I have to write down all the recipes that they're sharing on these like Food Network shows."
Yeah.
And I loved like the Food Network and the travel show, and I kind of grew up in Anthony Bourdain era of television, and I absolutely loved just learning about these cultures through their food. And
this is how you eat a shrew.
Yes, exactly. All those sorts of things, and I just is the more unfamiliar the better, in my opinion. And I ended up going to the Saraga International Market. My mom would take me there, and every time that we would visit, I could try a different ingredient. And so she let me buy a different ingredient,
Nice.
and I absolutely loved just tasting the world through all these different things. And I think as I got older, I got a little more bold with those decisions, and I was like, all right, I'm gonna bring some proteins home that she might not like, but that's why I had to make my first Peking duck in my college dorm room. But
just as long as it doesn't bark or meow.
Yeah, exactly. That was kind of her line, and she's like, "I don't know, you got some funky things." And I'm like, you know what? There's people that eat these things around the world. So yeah, for me that was really, I think, what's had that initial spark. And then from there, I started learning more about different cultures and languages. And so then the language route is really what took me to begin to actually travel to these other countries. So my first trip abroad, sort of on my own, was with the National Security Language Initiative for Youth Program. It's a bit of a mouthful, but they call it NSLY or NSLIY. And I lived in Chengdu, China for the summer after high school.
Now, where is that on the map?
That is, in Chengdu, China, it's Sichuan province. So if you're familiar with Sichuan food, the best Chinese food, in my humble opinion. But yeah, sort of in central China, central southern, if you will. And Chengdu is sort of the capital of that province, or one of the most well-known areas. Also home to 85% of the world's panda population. So bit of a cool experience, yeah, living there. So I really enjoyed it.
Did you get to play with the pandas?
I did. I got to go see the Panda Conservation Center, and had the best hot pot of my life. So that really
awesome.
I like to say that was my like Netflix trial for wanting to learn Chinese. I was like, okay, if I can do it here and I can learn, and I quite literally was dropped into China without really knowing any Mandarin, and had to sort of figure things out.
Was
of course, the program
in high school or college?
It was right after high school.
Okay.
So it was the summer after high school, before college,
Yeah.
and I actually came back to the U.S. and I started college the next day.
Wow.
So it was a bit of a tight turnaround down to
fun.
IU, but it was a fun time.
That's very fun.
Yeah.
That's exciting.
Yeah.
And so that was your first international experience. And then you've been on you were a Fulbright Scholar, and you've been the youth ambassador for the U.S. at Expo 2020 in Dubai. Tell us about those two things.
Yeah, so I would say more recently, my work with Fulbright has been really, really interesting because I was able to create this research project. So I was researching the impact of coral reef restoration on fishing communities and the livelihoods of people in North Bali specifically. And everyone sort of thinks of Bali, or at least Indonesia, in this like idea of it just being Bali. And there is so much more to Indonesia. I mean, quite literally 17,000 other islands to factor in. And but then also within Bali, a greatly sort of forgotten part of the island is the north part, because all of the tourism is concentrated in the south. And so it was really interesting,
like
because
Thailand.
Yeah, similar to that, where you have these sort of pockets of where the tourists are and where people go to visit. And so, it's called Buleleng Regency. It's the north side of the island, and it experiences a lot less tourism. And it was really, really hit by COVID, because they did have, at least a decent market for tourism, kind of the ones
a lot of people
that wanted to get off the beaten path. They would go to the north side. But at the same time, when COVID hit, it just completely wiped out basically the entire tourist population of Bali. And so that was where the government stepped in. They said, we have a lot of scuba dive instructors that don't have any tourists to train, and so what can we do? So they actually funded a program where they provided wages for them, and then they had a coral reef restoration project. It was called the Indonesia Coral Reef Garden, so ICRG. And yeah,
would it be from I must say garbage, but pollution, garbage, or was it from over shipping, dumping? Is it what caused the coral? Was it the coral reefs? They were being broken up, like stuff breaking them.
A lot of different factors.
Because it's alive until it.
Yeah, it's
until
mostly changes in ocean acidification with the warming of the ocean, and specifically in these in this coral triangle is what it's called. It's where most of the world's coral diversity is, and it has just been so depleted by rising ocean temperatures. And it's really coral reefs specifically are one of the largest indicators of our changing climate, and I think it's really interesting because it's one of the most visible indicators for people. It was really interesting to have conversations with people that had been living there, expats, Australian expats that had been living there, or even just Balinese divers themselves. I've lived here my whole life, I've been here for 20 years. The coral looks so different. And, there is life that's coming back. There are these efforts, like the ICRG. But at the same time, that takes a lot of community effort. That takes a lot of just resources and work. And it was really amazing to meet these folks that are really just stewards of the ocean. And it was interesting because there's lots of politics and dynamics locally with the government. I was attending government meetings. I was attending community meetings, and really seeing how these sort of village management systems, if you have someone that's really passionate about the ocean and caring for their coastline, just the difference between the villages of one person that is just really focused on this goal and is out there diving every single day, managing the reefs, trying to prevent illegal fishing in these protected areas. They can really make a difference, and it was amazing to sort of see that impact firsthand. And again, that's what my research is sort of assessing, is what the community views as that impact, what the project project impacts were. And so that's what I'm sort of working on right now, but hoping to maybe return potentially for a follow-up visit in the coming years when I'm in my master's program.
That's fascinating. A lot of people know, they because people used to go around the bottom of the continent, the old days. You'd go around in South America, and then around South Africa. But then we have the Panama Canal that came in the early 20th century, and then Suez. But perhaps a lot of people aren't aware that area, the waters through there, Southeast Asia, is one of the largest traffic areas for
Malacca
shipping
Strait, for sure,
and fishing. It's really huge. So that the impacts on that would be really strong.
Yeah, and my background in East and Southeast Asia, I'm very much interested in sort of all marine affairs globally, but specifically in East and Southeast Asia is something that I'm really intrigued by. And I don't know, I think there's a lot of challenges to overcome and a lot of sort of deals to negotiate and just trying to improve these systems for all. So that's been my more recent path. And then you were asking about Expo, and Expo was a fantastic experience. I would say that was one of the things that really sort of turned me on to the larger sort of global aspects of things. I had lived in China. I had also been to Indonesia.
This was like the Olympics, kind of, right? Without the sports.
Exactly. So I like to call it, because a lot of people don't know that Expo still happened, because they rebranded to Expo. It's formerly known as the World's Fair, and I think most people are familiar with that.
Yeah.
Eiffel Tower,
World's Fair was very,
Chicago,
very popular.
everyone kind of makes, even Seattle, everyone makes these connections. Yep. But at the same time, it's still happening. I didn't realize it was still happening until I found out about the youth ambassador position, and then I was like, wait a second, this is amazing. And I mean, truly, it was the most incredible experience, because you have people from every single country in the world living together in effectively the Olympic villages, and so every floor would be like, okay, Ukraine is beneath us, and then we have Tonga and Tahiti above us, and just all these different people that we'd just go and sit down at the pool and chat with each other, or in between our breaks at work. Really just amazing to have all these conversations with people from around the world. So I loved my time there. Yeah,
that's good. Yeah. I'm sure your Christmas card list is huge.
Oh, it's I have places that don't even have an address. I'm like, just give it to this guy.
Yeah.
He's on like a yak somewhere, and just send it out. Yeah.
Exactly.
For sure.
3 miles down the waterway.
3 doors down on the left-hand side, there should be a big red lantern or something, and that's how I have to find them.
And sure. But this is very interesting. And then you've studied Mandarin and Indonesian, and which is really. That's you're going to be the Secretary of State.
Oh, I don't know. We'll see.
Now, you hold 3 degrees from Indiana University.
Yes.
What are your 3 degrees?
So I have a degree in International Studies, East Asian Languages and Cultures, so that's where the Chinese comes in, and then Sustainable Food and Marine Systems, which is part of the Individualized Major Program. So my approach was a bit more interdisciplinary. I began taking classes in the business school, but then I also really liked the geography of food classes that I was taking, and if we're going to talk about international food markets, you have to talk about all these shipping paths, and so looking at like GIS data or even just agricultural means. And so I took some classes in geography and anthropology and drew on a lot of different areas. I mean, economics, everything. So I'm really happy with how that turned out. I love that IU has a program for it, because you still have to stay within these structures and the framework for presenting your degree as a legitimate thing.
Sure.
But at the same time, I was able to take all those business accounting classes, international business in the Kelley School, and pair those with all of my international studies and anthropology, geography courses in the College of Arts and Sciences. So
that's fascinating.
Very happy with how it turned out, and that's sort of the path that I'm pursuing. So I'm happy with that that I chose to join that program. And that they accepted me.
And now you're going into marine affairs, which that covers a lot of bases. A lot of people. We talked about this earlier about how. One thing that affects a lot of commerce that a lot of people don't think about is marine law. It's huge, and it goes way back because a lot of trade was based on shipping and so forth. Now, was it for the marine systems? It was really that experience in Indonesia that drew you into that.
Yeah, that kind of helped solidify things for me, because I knew I didn't want to go directly from my undergraduate right into grad school. I wanted to take at least a year to sort of sort things out and decide if the path that I was sort of leaning towards was exactly what I wanted to do. And that really confirmed things for me, because I just have a deep passion for food systems and bettering our food systems, and I truly believe that happens with what's on our plate and how people have access to different foods. And I think that specifically seafood is one of the areas that we can make really great strides in, just increasing transparency, bettering livelihoods for the people that are actually going out there and fishing. I think that's another thing where the language component comes in really, really, really handy, because Chinese and Indonesian are two of the, languages that are most widely spoken on these fishing vessels around the world. And of course, English, that helps. So being able to converse with a lot of these fishermen, I'm really excited to see what that could look like in like future field work and opportunities. Because, in Indonesia, I was working with a lot of the divers and the dive masters, so it's a little bit of a different crowd. But I was, talking to the fishermen as well, and a lot of people just don't really have any connection to where their seafood comes from. And it's funny because from the Midwest, people are kind of like, how'd you end up doing fisheries? And my whole family's from like Rhode Island, the East Coast, so had that connection there.
That's a boat. Rhode Island equals boats.
Exactly,
Everybody has a boat.
And small fishing villages. My grandparents lived in the summertime, had, small fishing villages right off the, in Narragansett. And so really having that connection to seafood and like where my food came from. I mean, going diving for quahogs and fishing in the summertime really helped me sort of develop that connection to marine food systems. And so now I'm, sort of taking that globally. Yeah.
Wow. Whoever's going to be the next administration, I think you're up for the next office.
Hire me.
As even doing a master's degree, you've really done your studies on this, because that is really that's a critical thing, don't you think? As people now more and more are getting more critical or thoughtful about what they eat, and that means the whole process. Yeah. And then you're dealing with not just fishing, but also in this line of wherever you end up in marine affairs with supply chain. Yeah. And that's what is very important, of like getting the food to people. And that is a fascinating thing. Tell us about when you get to the University of Washington for your master's degree in marine affairs. What will basically, your thesis is really the end product, isn't it? And so what is the goal? What will you achieve? Your focus?
So my focus, specifically at University of Washington, will be working with Alaskan fishing villages to better understand how the regulatory and also just climate impacts their fishing. So looking at it from both a sort of environmental perspective, things that might be a little more out of their control because we live in a world and it's changing, but then also what the government is doing to sort of manage these fish stocks and how that actually gets applied, how those policies affect people and then ultimately affect our seafood supply chain. So that's something that I'm really interested in and excited to be working with Dr. Ann Boudreau when I'm there. So she'll be my research partner and a research investigator there. Really excited to work with such an amazing professor as her. And she's been working in Alaska for the past 10 years. She recently made the move to Washington, so she's still keeping the Alaska connection, through her work and through her studies. So I'm really excited for that, and to be in Seattle and be doing that research, because a lot of those sort of conversations that I envision I'll be having there, or at least from what she's told me, it's a similar culture to the lives of the fishermen in Indonesia. It's sort of, you have to have these conversations if you're going to go into this community and say, well, how can I help you? How are these regulations affecting you? You're trying to better understand these communities and do this community-based research. You have to be able to just chat with them first. You have to. That was something I experienced in Indonesia, where like people wouldn't talk to me until I sat down and had a coffee, had a tea, they call it pisang goreng, it's like fried bananas, and until I just sat and chat with them for like a whole day. We wouldn't talk about work, wouldn't say anything. It was just like, okay, I want to get to know you first. And
getting to know you.
Yeah, exactly. I think that really, really is so true. I mean, in Indonesia and a lot of communities that I've lived in around the world, it's like people just want to know who you are and where you're coming from and what your perspective is before, getting into the nitty-gritty.
Before you get into nitty-gritty. Yeah. That's a good idea. I know that Japanese culture is very much that way. I mean, that's what you do. You don't just get into the office, get down to business and talk stuff. And that's actually part of, I think, slower, what they call in Italy, the slow food movement, where you really have to go down to that speed. You can't just
know a place,
fly in,
know its people,
fly out. And that really helps, and especially with communicate. People will be more inclined to communicate with you if you spend the time with them, getting to talk, talking about things. Now, there's I could go on and on for hours because this is so fascinating, and you've had a unique story because you're just going into a master's program, but you've been global. I mean, you talk like someone who is working in Washington, D.C. You really do. And the thing is, to be that advanced at your age is quite a thing. And it's a testimony to your whole, your whole pathway. So without kind of saying at the end of your, because usually at the beginning, because I did a master's too, it's like, where are you going to go, or where are you going to end up?
Exactly.
It's like, what's the, do you go on to a doctorate, or do you go into working for a company or a regulatory group?
Right now, I'm interested in the private sector just because I think there is a lot of change that can be made, and I'm kind of interested in making that happen a little quicker than maybe some of the larger, more regulatory changes that would come from something like government or like an IGO position. But at the same time, I do think that my research background would lend itself well to making some of these like commodity market reports, fish market reports. I had an internship in Taiwan with the Foreign Agricultural Service there, and that was an interesting experience to be able to make these commodity reports and basically say for American, at the time I was working with like citrus and beef commodities were like my focus, and basically making these fact sheets for American farmers and saying, here, this is what, the Taiwanese consumer is interested in, this is what they want, this is the trends, but then also looking at that from like a trade perspective. And that's where the language skills really came in handy, because I was looking at, trade documents and import-export, sheets in Mandarin and, doing all of my analysis there. So I think in the long term, I might end up in a government role or in one of those more regulatory positions. But in the short term, I am kind of looking for private sector opportunities.
Gotcha. Well, that's very that is interesting. That's fascinating.
We'll see.
Really, because it's you've got this pathway before you, and it's just really exciting adventures. You've gone on adventures. I mean, when I talk to my pet, I go, we're going on adventures. And he knows that you're going to the park.
Yeah, he's going to the park.
But you're like going to the world.
I like going to the park, too.
It's a great one.
It's a good time.
So, now in our conclusion, I wanted to ask you three things. So we always have kind of a learning part of from our guests, and I think you have so much to educate, to learn, to teach, is that particularly for students who are coming up through school and they're going through the program and they're thinking about, and they could end up in all sorts of different areas.
All different fields, yeah.
Business, you name it. What would you recommend for going on that first adventure? Now, it's going to be for different people, but what would you say was a significant thing? Like, really, why did you choose going to China?
Yeah. So for me, my choices have sort of been influenced by where the funding is, because this wasn't something that I could do and say, okay, I'm going to spend $10,000 and go on one of these study abroad programs. That wasn't really an option. And so for me, I was like, okay, what scholarships are available? What programs are available? And actually through a friend of a friend of a friend is how I learned about the NISLI program. And that they actually offer it for 8 different languages. So they send students, high school students, all over the world. But they have, courses in Russian. They have it for Hindi. They have it for Indonesian. They have it for Chinese. All these different languages that you can learn.
Yes.
Korean's one of the favorites. And so yeah, that was what sort of drew me to China specifically, was that I already had this sort of background interest in it, actually working through the Lunar New Year's festival here in Carmel.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, and I would pass out the mooncakes, and I remember one year just being like, I can't really say anything to all the aunties. They're coming up and they're picking their mooncakes. How cool would it be if I could actually tell them which flavor, ask them which flavor they want? And so the next year,
how do you know our language?
Yeah, exactly. The next year I was like, okay, I'm going to do my research, and so I learned a few different words, and I was able to just converse and ask them which Yue Bing did you want? And that's Mandarin learn for mooncake. And so that really helped me just connect with them, and was sort of like the switch that I was like, okay, I really want to learn this language. I want to learn Chinese, and I want to be able to go there and learn in an immersive environment. But as you said, like, you don't have to just be a language nerd. They have programs like Yes Abroad is one that was created in like 2001, 2002 for students to go to majority Muslim countries and learn about, their culture. It's more of a cultural exchange. You take language classes, but it's more focused on the culture.
Yeah.
And I applied for that.
You don't show the bottom of your shoe at people.
Yeah, exactly. Things that are really important to learn. And so I went, with that program, I was going to go to Senegal, and then the timing conflicted with China. So I had to choose between China and Senegal. But yeah, Yes Abroad, Nestle, I mean, all these, there's one called CBOIX. That one is a German exchange program if people are interested in going to Germany.
Nice.
And all these are available for high school students. And then once you really get involved with those programs, that sort of opens up a world of opportunities, because it was through my experience with Nestle that I learned, I could be an alumni ambassador for them. Then I could be a youth ambassador at Expo. I could do the critical language scholarship, which is something for college students for, other languages. Yeah, so all those are sort of language focused, but we have sports diplomacy programs. We have, food diplomacy programs. There's really, really amazing.
I would like that one.
I would say that's one of my favorites, honestly. I think that's really incredible, and it's actually an IU alum that heads the Culinary Diplomacy Project, and really, really just amazing opportunities for people, regardless of their background, regardless of what they're interested in. I mean, the government really wants more people in STEM to have these sort of broad international perspectives, and I think that's something that's really, really interesting, and I don't know, maybe not a lot of people think about. It's pretty easy to say, I'm an international studies major. Of course I'm going to go abroad. Of course I'm going to do all these cool experiences. But at the same time, just learning other languages, learning about other cultures, eating different foods, I mean, really helps you, I think, appreciate and understand the world in a much deeper way, in a much more meaningful way. And one of the best parts, one of the most rewarding parts about Expo for me was going to every single pavilion. I went to every one, and I would ask whoever I found, I would say, what is your favorite food? What's your favorite dish from your country? And I have a whole Excel spreadsheet that has all these different recipes, has all these different, bucket list foods that I either want to try or I want to make at home. And so I've been in the process of making and sort of documenting all those different dishes that I've made from around the world. And
so have you made it to the B's yet?
I have, I'm not going alphabetically, but I have probably 130 dishes in. I've really done some work to make these dishes from around the world. And people absolutely loved it when I actually knew what they were talking about. I had one guy, speaking of Senegal, he said, have you tried chubadine yet? And I had never actually heard it said. It's called chubadine. It's spelled with a TH, but it's ch. And I had only ever seen it written, so I was like, wait a second, I don't know if I know.
Sounds like a diving sport.
Oh, I know, right? It's a very interesting name.
That's how you get your fish.
And then I was like, oh wait, is that the fish rice dish? And he's like, yeah, wait, you know what it is? I'm like, oh yeah, I do know what it is. And so as soon as I knew the correct pronunciation for the name, I knew what he was talking about. And he's like, wait, no way you know this dish. And that was just such an instant way of connection. And then immediately he starts talking about all these other Senegalese foods, and I have, a few other things that I had made. So I'm like, yeah, I love chicken yassa, all these different dishes. And immediately it was like, okay, we have something to talk about. We have this common ground. And with food, people are usually pretty excited to talk about it. So I think it's a great introduction. So for me, that was the intro. And I just encourage young people to go out. I mean, actually no matter your age, but especially young people to go out, explore the world, see what opportunities there are. I mean, all these government exchange programs are wonderful. If you want to do the private ones, I mean, AFS, you can even host an international student in your home here in the U.S.
Yeah, we did that.
That's another way.
My folks did that.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. She was from South Korea.
Oh, cool, yeah.
Yeah, it was fun.
Yeah, and I think that's just one of the best ways to really have this sort of people-to-people connection, with others from around the world. And I just think there's no better way to explore the world than through food and discussion. So for me, that's the number one thing. I just encourage people to pursue that.
Your plan B could always be having an international restaurant.
There we go. And each week we focus on a different food.
Build some little island sort of city that's this international spot where everybody comes up in their boats.
Yeah, exactly. They can just try it. Honestly, that's the World's Fair. It's you just walk outside, you go, what am I going to eat today? I want to go to Portugal. All right, cool.
You can, that would be very fun.
Yeah.
Now you're going to, the end result on your studies is doing a thesis. And you've mentioned going to Alaska, correct? And so that will be the extent of your thesis. Is there, in that, is there a goal? Was your goal, because that's something you'll work your way into.
Yes, yes.
But it will be in the communication side of, in other words, learning from them about their methodologies and the environment, and basically, I would think the capacity of how many the fish out there and how they harvest and so forth.
Yeah,
along that line.
And right now I'm looking at how to basically set it up in the best way possible, because basically the focus of, so I have a research assistantship.
Yes.
So I'll be working under Professor Anne Boudreau, and she's the one that has been working with these communities for over 10 years. And some of her previous students have worked on everything from, kelp farming in Alaska as like an alternative to fishing, and then they've had some people that have worked on more of like the nitty-gritty environmental and regulatory sort of aspects of things. So I'm interested in maybe understanding how these communities interact with the international seafood market is something that I'm intrigued by, and think that could be one of the paths for my thesis. But I'm open to sort of thinking about these different ideas, but it will be in the realm of what I like to say, the connections between food, people, and climate is really where I sit.
Interesting.
So yeah, that's my focus.
That's your focus. Well, fabulous. Well, and to conclude, Marria, you've been talking about fish. Here's something practical for our audience.
Yes.
What are some things that we could learn from you about, about going to the fish market, wherever that would be, whether that would be down by the waterfront or at the grocery or, what have you, the market?
Yeah, the reason why I even chose, fish and marine, seafoods to focus on is because I think it is one area that we don't really have a deep knowledge or connection to, because especially in the Midwest, it's so far away. And so, if you grew up on the coast, you're a fishmonger, you have your fish guy. Like I said, I grew up diving for quahogs in Rhode Island. And then in Indiana, I have friends that are like, I have never had anything other than tilapia before. And so really asking questions to your fishmonger, whether that's at, just your chain grocery store, or if you can go to something like Kaplinger's here in Indiana. They're a fantastic fishmonger that gets everything, fresh. It's really, really good. And, depending on what your accessibility to that is, just ask questions, because your fishmonger ultimately really knows a lot about their fish. One example that I give is my dad loves his Costco membership, and he loves getting Costco salmon.
Salmon, like the whole
salmon. The whole fish,
$3.
right? You have all your fish. And with that, though, they're pretty good about their sourcing, but they, we've looked at it in more recent years, and he's like, well, I tried the trout once, and it's actually better and cheaper than the salmon, and it's wild-caught trout, so it's not farm-raised. Farm-raised salmon is a whole, environmental issue in and of itself, so it's better to have this wild-caught salmon, and trout is a much less fish species. And so if you're looking at, seafood alternatives, basically the same flavor profile, but one is significantly less fished, or it isn't overfished, I guess is the way to put it. And so if you can alleviate, some of that pressure on the supply chain, everyone immediately thinks, okay, salmon, cod,
because salmon
tilapia
is in the kind of health food thing right now.
Yes, exactly. And
so,
a lot of people are really familiar with it, and it seems safe, to make that choice. But if every single person is eating salmon, we are completely decimating these salmon stocks. And so thinking about how you can sort of diversify your diet, mussels are a fantastic example of something that also you can get at Costco. I've seen them at Kroger, they are here, but they are filter feeders. And so they're fantastic for the environment. It's probably one of the best proteins that you can eat. They're super nutritious. And, a lot of people are just maybe a little intimidated to prepare them and everything, but you have a little bit of butter, a little have your aromatics, add a splash of white wine and some cream, and they're fantastic. So I really think that, if people can just try new seafoods, really get out there and approach different things, but also ask those questions. You can consult something like the Monterey Bay Aquarium. They have Seafood Watch that tells you what species are endangered. And so making really,
that's good to know.
I think intentional decisions as a consumer is where people can really start to see the world on their plate and see the effect that their consumption has, on these global supply chains and sort of that dynamic. So I think that's one of the areas that people can start at home and really take action in their own home for that. Yeah.
Okay, that's good to know.
I know. I'm hungry now, though.
Yeah, I know. Let's order some.
That's the thing.
Some fish.
Yeah.
Well, fabulous. Marria, thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
And best wishes on your studies. And we look forward to hearing from down the road on your successes.
We'll see. We'll see if which path I go. Call me in a few years. We'll see.
Well, great.
Yeah.
Well, that's it for today's show. Our guest today was Marria Peduto. We'd like to thank our sponsor, Hotel Carmichael. We're recording today in Feinstein's. We look forward to being with you on our next episode of The Omnibus Show.
If you enjoyed this program, please like, share, and subscribe to continue the conversation. For the Omnibus Show newsletter, please sign up at theomnibusshow.com.